For those of you who are doing the proposition of policy, I have provided you with a handout that you can see in front of you that has addressing the counter argument. So the counter argument is where you address the opposition of your proposition. If somebody disagrees with you, this is where you bring up their reasons for disagreeing with you. And so although we have written this problem, cause, solution, I don't want you to feel like you have to stick to those specific words if it doesn't make sense to you. You can replace that with, I will first describe the outstanding needs for this proposition. Then I will address my opposition's perspective on my proposition. And finally, we will arrive at some specific ways that you can do blank with proposition. Does that make sense to y'all? So we decided last time that often the word causes confuses people and they think, oh, it's the cause of the what. In essence, it's the reasons why people disagree with you. It's the reason the system has the law already. It's the reason that people oppose this from going into place. It's the reason that individuals have maybe they have a value structure that prevents them from believing or buying in. These are the areas that you're going to address. And so much like the problems paragraph, I believe that you only, or main point, you only need between 2 to 3 causes at most. And it's essential that you, of course, pick causes that you will be able to refute. We never want to put a cause out there that can't be refuted because it may, in this small amount of time, in a speech, when you're acting as an advocate, because it may leave the audience thinking otherwise. So how does this work? Well, the second main point, remember, it's either going to be like the causes or the reasons, right? Like you can write out the main point. But how this is organized is pretty simplistic. You're first going to write the claim of opposition. And if you see there on your paper that I've provided you with, I believe, wherever that may be. All right, you can start with a sentence that, introduces that person's point of view. So you can say something like, in contrast to like the words, the first problem is, the second problem is, in essence, you can say something like, some critics believe, college students will think, the opponents of this bill have asserted, some advocates for higher taxes propose. So identify who the opposition is and really what they're suggesting. Is it that they oppose it, that they don't like it, that they value something different? You can assert that there. Then I say, does this need evidence? Does your opposition's claim need evidence? I say this because I had a drinking and driving speech one semester. And when they addressed the opposition, they were trying to give us some reasons as to why people are still drinking and driving. And one of the claims that they gave is some college students drink and drive because they think it's fun. I was like, no, they don't. Nobody thinks that's fun. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Sure as all get up. Sure as heck. There's the research that's been conducted about college students that when the reasons that they drink and drive is because it's fun. I was like, get out of town. Like that they think it's fun to have the feeling, to feel that feeling of freedom, etc. So this needed evidence for two different reasons. One, because I was like, that's not true. Nobody's thinking that. Like, is this even necessary to argue in opposition, or are you just trying to bring up something? But then the other opposition and the need to explain it or give us some kind of evidence is because when we produce their perspective or their opinion, in this case, because it is such an illogical thought process about, like, it's fun to get all messed up and drive around and see how free you are, see how you can go around in circles or almost hit things. That is such an excellent point of support because, in essence, it's persuasive on its own to your audience. Why? Because that sounds really what? Does it sound reckless to you? And does that kind of recklessness already make you want to be like, ew? And in essence, I don't even have to say it because the example is helping me. That it's a helpful piece of proof. Does that make sense to you? So that's when you may want to use this kind of proof here, if you need some evidence. But if it doesn't need any evidence, and we're like, we get it. Like, one of the reasons people don't take a public speaking class is because they are scared. You're like, I get it. Nobody needs to know. But it's pretty much obvious, right? People don't like public speaking, that's it. So instead, then what we can do is we can skip to this part. And this is where you either concede or you refute. But they will be done hand in hand. A concession, much like, Hillary Clinton gave a concession speech when she lost to Donald Trump, meaning she said, okay, I am no longer, it is yours, you got it. We don't ever want to concede in our speech because, in a debate, you oftentimes don't want to concede. If you do concede that argument's dropped, it's deemed no longer valid and the point is given to them. But you get to choose your arguments, and so why not choose those that can be shown in these major ideas? So the idea with concession in regards to this proposition of policy is that ideally what we want you to do, if you see here in concession sentence, concede, we acknowledge the other person's validity in either their thought process or the fact that this law was at one time a good idea, or perchance that may work in some cases, or that, yes, it will reduce taxes, but, and that but is what the refutation is. So if you see here where it says concession sentence, for this reason, opponents believe, or they argue, or they claim, or they contest, blah, blah, blah. But, and then you go to 5, but that argument is rather out of date. But that argument doesn't take into account the 70,000 people who will be at a disadvantage if you put this into play. Does that make sense? That although it sounds good in theory, in practice, we have seen it play out much differently. And then you give your evidence as to how to prove that true. And this also may be a line of reasoning. So you need to then provide us with at least a piece of evidence or evidences to prove that your claim is true. Like, for example, although we may think that's a good idea, people tried that in Australia, and the consequences were dire. For example, when put through, blank and blank and blank and blank happened. Therefore, the idea that this is going to benefit is true in that it will only benefit a small few, and in turn, this benefit can't be put into place, and that is why we must accept my particular proposition. Does that make sense to you all, how that step works? So this, in essence, is the structure, and there is an example here as to how that is written. Again, having A and a B and a C between 2 to 3 is good. And all I want to see is that you're at least creating a framework or putting a couple pieces of evidence in there for next time. If you are simply doing the proposition of fact, your job will be to bring about the claim and some evidence and ensure that that evidence is making sense. Remember, so like, how are we going to connect that evidence that we've provided? What were the steps that it took in our mind to get there? Walk that out for the audience. Make it clear to them. Help them to see how this is going to affect them or make sense to them. And if you have to do a comparison, or you need to show a cause and effect, or you need to provide multiple pieces of evidence to get us there, or if you need to pull on a concrete fact that has always been established in the world, then that's what you do. Do you think, so we didn't get around to doing the evaluation for the